Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. 10 years ago, during the very hot Texas summer of 2011, a group of climate academics, including Texas A&M professor Andrew Dessler, wrote a book making some forecasts. They said that Texas weather during the 21st century was going to be hellish and was going to be very much like the hot and dry weather of 2011. Let's take a look now at how they did with those forecasts. They made those forecasts during a dry spell, and since then Texas has had their wettest years on record. The summer of 2011 was the hottest summer on record in Texas, but since then temperatures have plummeted, and this past summer was actually one of the coolest. Generally, summers in Texas were much hotter prior to the year 1960. Measured over the entire year, Texas afternoon temperatures have been declining since the start of the 20th century, and the hottest year was 1921, 100 years ago. But Texas government listened to the scientists and they built a lot of windmills. On February 12th of this year, USA Today was bragging that wind power produced up to 2/3 of Texas energy output in 2020. They said it was a banner year and it was great news for Joe Biden's climate plan. But 2 days later, on Valentine's Day, the windmills froze up and lots of people died in Texas because they couldn't stay warm. According to the very liberal Austin American Statesman, nearly half of Texas installed wind power generation capacity has been offline because of frozen wind turbines in West Texas. Climate scientists lied and people died in Texas. One of the authors of that 2011 book was Texas A&M professor John Nielsen Gammon, who's also the Texas state climatologist. He was apparently undaunted by the failures of 10 years ago and is back making some more climate forecasts. 10 years ago they predicted that Texas was going to be hot and dry because of global warming, but now they say that global warming is making Texas very wet. And apparently the authors of this article think that snow-covered ground in Texas is evidence of overheating. The Texas climatologists are predicting bigger storm surges for the state and a doubling in the number of 100-degree days. You would think that the Texas state climatologist would know that the worst storm surge in U.S. history occurred at Galveston, Texas in the year 1900 and killed 10,000 people. Dead bodies were washing up on the beach at Galveston for weeks after the September 1900 storm. In 1986, the Associated Press wrote up an article listing the deadliest hurricanes and storm surges in Texas history. Here's one from 1776, 1818, 1844, 1854, 1867, and then 1875. The storm surge from the 1875 storm destroyed the city of Indianola, Texas, killed 176 people, and washed away 3/4 of the city. 11 years later, in 1886, was the worst hurricane year in U.S. history. 4 storms hit Texas and 3 hit Florida. One of those storms wiped Indianola, Texas off the map permanently. In 1880, 2 hurricanes struck Texas, including one which nearly destroyed Brownsville. The Galveston hurricane was the worst in U.S. history and produced a storm surge of 15 to 20 feet. And then in 1915, Galveston was hit by another hurricane and a 16-foot storm surge. In 1919, Corpus Christi was hit by a storm surge of 16 feet, which killed almost 300 people. The list goes on, but it's pretty stunning that the Texas state climatologist doesn't seem to know Texas history. And as far as extreme rainfall goes, Texas holds a number of world and U.S. records. On Memorial Day weekend 1935, Woodward Ranch, Texas got 15 inches of rain in 2 hours. That was a U.S. record. And then a little bit later, they got 22 inches of rain in 2 hours and 45 minutes, which was a world's record. 1921 was the hottest year on record in Texas, and they set the U.S. rainfall record for 18 hours, 36.4 inches at Thrall, Texas. The U.S. record for 24 hours rainfall was 43 inches at Alvin, Texas in 1979. And 150 years ago, Galveston set the U.S. record of almost 4 inches of rain in 15 minutes. Once again, it's stunning that the Texas state climatologist doesn't seem to know the history of his own state. Now let's look at his prediction of increasing number of 100-degree days in Texas. The number of 100-degree days in Texas has dropped off sharply over the past century, with this past summer being one of the least hot on record. Now let's look at Texas mean temperature since 1895, which is the average of the daily maximums and the daily minimums. The hottest year was 100 years ago in 1921. Temperatures declined through the end of the 1970s and then have risen back some since then. In 2012, the San Antonio Express newspaper published this graph showing 1921 as the hottest year, and they said research shows Texas is not warming. Note that this graph is almost identical to my graph. And this was the official National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration graph for Texas in the year 2012. It showed no warming and was once again very similar to my graph. In 2012, there was officially no warming in Texas, and 1921 was the hottest year. Now let's look at their current version of the same graph. Now NOAA shows lots of warming in Texas from 1895 to 2011, with recent years being the hottest on record. They generate their graph from the same data set that I use, but they massively tamper with it. This is what the actual data looks like. The hottest year in Texas was 100 years ago. The whole catastrophic climate change story is based on fake tampered data and appeals to authority from academics who've been wrong with their predictions over and over again. People like these Texas A&M professors used to be known as false prophets. In his novel 1984, George Orwell wrote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." They want you to believe that there's a climate emergency which doesn't actually exist. The reality is that people are voting with their feet. Texas is one of the fastest growing states. Joe Rogan moved there recently, and now Elon Musk is moving there too. The only people who seem to actually believe this climate nonsense are the clowns who run our governments. Toto has been trying to educate them for the past 13 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.